At roughly 7:30 am on a late 1943 over the approaches to Rabaul, Major Gregory Pappy Boyington is alone in an F4U Corsair, with zeros behind him, not one, not two, but a whole string closing in like they already own the kill. This is the kind of pursuit that ends fast. A fighter chase isn't a duel, it's geometry. The attackers only need one clean, predictable moment. One climb they can read, one turn they can cut inside, one steady line they can hold long enough to fire, and Rabaul is the worst place to give them that moment. It's hostile airspace. It's where you don't get extra seconds. Here's the problem. American doctrine wants altitude and clean. Vertical tactics, energy fighting, discipline. Do it right and keep your options. But when you're being hunted by multiple zeros, the right move can become a pattern, something the enemy can anticipate. Climb. And you show them a straight, readable track. Turn, and you give them a stable picture. Fly like the manual, and you might die like the manual never admits. Boyington also has a social problem inside the cockpit reputation. He's not the neat, polished image of a perfect fighter pilot. He's rough-edged, loud, the kind of guy people label before they measure. And in that era, labels stuck. To some men, American and Japanese, the way he's about to fly looks amateur. Like civilian habits, like a farmer who wandered into a fighter, a farmer in a Corsair. That's the insult. That's the dismissal. And that's why this moment is so addictive as a story, because before it ends, 11 pursuing zeros will lose him over Rabaul. Not he shot down 11, not a fairy tale. The claim is tighter and, in some ways, harder to believe. 11 enemy fighters fail to finish him. They lose visual contact, lose coordination, and break off a chase they were favored to win. How does that happen in open sky? It starts with a decision that looks like panic if you don't understand what it's doing to the pursuit. Boyington abandons the one advantage doctrine tells him to protect. He throws away altitude, instead of climbing or taking the clean. Textbook fight. He drives the Corsair down toward low level, toward the messy layer where sightlines break and angles change too fast to lock. Near terrain, near cloud layers, near the horizon where contrast and glare can erase you for a heartbeat at a time. Up high. Air combat is neat math. Down low, it turns into a knife fight with bad lighting. And that matters because pursuit depends on one fragile thing, a shared, stable view of the target. If the target's movement becomes chaotic, tiny changes in height, speed, and direction, each pursuer starts making micro-corrections. One slides wide, one hesitates, one loses the exact spot against haze. Another sees a flash of wing, and then nothing. The formation stretches. The chase stops being one coordinated machine and becomes a set of individuals guessing. That's the crazy idea in plain words: make the enemy's perfect pursuit impossible to maintain. Don't fight their strengths, break their picture. Boyington doesn't have time to debate it. He can feel the pressure behind him. The way multiple aircraft compress space, waiting for him to act like a normal pilot, waiting for the predictable move that turns pursuit into execution. So he refuses to be predictable. He drops hard, then starts flying like someone who has no interest in looking professional, only in staying alive. Not one smooth maneuver, a sequence, a rhythm of changes. Enough to keep the zeros correcting. Enough to keep them from settling into a firing solution. From a distance, it looks wrong, like the farmer doesn't know better. But if you're behind him, it's worse. The target won't give you a clean line, won't give you a steady angle, won't give you the one easy second you need to end it. And that's the promise of this episode. We're going to show how that low altitude, untextbook choice, something other pilots would mock on sight, turns into the exact reason 11 zeros lose him over Rabaul. If you want to see how Boyington turned that farmer in a Corsair insult into the move that made 11 zeros lose him over Rabaul, hit like. Subscribe to WWII Stories, and stay with us because the rules that should have gotten him killed are about to make this story even crazier. To understand why Boyington's drop looked like madness, you have to understand the world he was flying in. Rabaul wasn't just enemy territory. It was a fortress port airfields, shipping, radar, and enough anti-aircraft fire to make pilots feel like the sky itself was booby-trapped. For American flyers, it was the kind of place you hit fast and clean, then get out. You didn't linger, you didn't improvise, and you definitely didn't start freelancing at low altitude where the ground could kill you as quickly as a zero. That's the first layer of resistance every instinct and every briefing told you to stay above the mess. Because the rules of fighter survival were built around one principle: altitude buys options. Altitude is time. Altitude is speed on demand. Altitude is your exit strategy. If you have it, you can choose the fight dive in. Fire. Climb out if you lose it. You're stuck negotiating with whatever's behind you. And against the A6M0, the rules were even more strict. The Zero's reputation in the Pacific wasn't built on armor or brute force. It was built on what mattered most in a close-range fight: turning and low-speed handling. If you let it drag you into a flat. Slow. Knife fight turning contest. It could sit inside your circle and eventually put rounds where they counted. That's why American doctrine, especially by late 1943, pounded the same message into every pilot: don't turn with it. Don't get slow. Keep your speed. Use altitude. Fight vertically. The Corsair was made for that kind of fighting. It was fast. It could dive hard. It could hit and leave. On paper, it was exactly the answer to the Zero if you flew it like a disciplined energy fighter. Which creates the central contradiction Boyington is about to exploit: the same doctrine that makes the Corsair deadly in clean. Planned engagements can become a trap in an ugly pursuit, because a pursuit isn't a setup, it's a chase with a clock running. When you're outnumbered and being hunted, the enemy isn't trying to dogfight you in the romantic sense. They're trying to corner you into a single predictable shape, force you into a climb they can time, a turn they can cut, a steady path they can hold for just long enough. And doctrine ironically teaches predictability. It teaches a correct response that looks the same across thousands of pilots. That predictability is comfort for your wingmen. It's also a gift to an enemy that's watching for it. Now add Boyington's second problem: he isn't just any pilot in any squadron. He's leading VMF 2114, the Black Sheep, a unit with swagger and a reputation that cuts both ways. Confidence is useful in combat until it reads as indiscipline. The line between aggressive and reckless is thin, and commanders do not reward pilots who survive by luck and embarrass their own doctrine while doing it. So even before bullets start flying, Boyington is pushing against two kinds of pressure: the enemy in the air and the expectations behind him. Because what does a good marine fighter pilot do in a dangerous situation? He stays high. He keeps his speed. He stays with his element. He doesn't get dragged down into the weeds, where every tiny mistake becomes fatal. He doesn't give the enemy a low-level chase that turns into chaos and friendly confusion. He doesn't abandon the clean geometry of altitude for the dirty geometry of the horizon. And yet here's the ugly truth about Rabaul fights: didn't always happen the way the rules wanted. Weather layers broke up formations. Glare and cloud could erase aircraft at the worst moment. Combat over a major base meant compression: too many planes, too many angles, too much happening too fast. A pilot could start the day with an altitude plan and end it with an enemy on his tail at exactly the wrong distance. In that world, the right move sometimes wasn't the move that saved you. It was the move that made you understandable. And being understandable is deadly when you're outnumbered. That's why the farmer in a Corsair insult matters. It's not just name-calling, It represents a belief that low-level civilian-style flying is sloppy, and sloppy gets you killed, that it's what you do when you've run out of ideas, that a real fighter pilot wins with clean doctrine, not with desperate improvisation. Boyington is about to challenge that belief in the most unforgiving way possible by betting his life on a place the rule book treats as a last resort. And now the chase is tightening. The Zeros behind him aren't guessing anymore. They're committing. They think they've finally forced him into the decision every hunted pilot makes. The question is whether Boyington gives them the decision they're expecting. Boyington's first proof doesn't look like victory. It looks like damage control. Because the moment he commits to low level, he accepts a trade every fighter pilot understands down here. You don't have much room to recover if you're wrong. There's less air beneath you to fix a mistake. Less time to think. Less margin for a clean pullout if a Zero suddenly appears where you didn't expect. But he also gets something he couldn't buy up high. He gets instability, and instability is poison to a coordinated pursuit. The Zeros behind him are trying to do the same thing any pursuers do. Hold the same target picture long enough to turn it into rounds on the windshield. That means staying in formation, keeping spacing, calling position changes, and matching his moves without overshooting. Up high, where the sky is clean and the horizon is simple. That's hard, but manageable. Down low, where cloud layers and glare chop the view into fragments. It becomes a different kind of job, more like keeping track of a knife in a dark room. Boyington starts forcing them into micro-decisions they don't want to make. He changes height in short bites, just enough to break the line of sight for a moment, just enough to make a pursuer correct. He bends his path so the Corsair is never a steady, centered target. He's not doing one dramatic stunt. He's doing a series of small, ugly adjustments that deny the enemy the one thing they need, a stable firing solution. And the first small win shows up exactly where you'd expect in the enemy's spacing. In a clean pursuit, the attackers compress one lead aircraft in the best firing position, the others stacked behind, ready to rotate and finish the job if the first misses. But when the target starts moving unpredictably at low level, the formation begins to stretch. One Zero stays higher for safety. Another drops a little too aggressively and has to pull back. Another slides wide, trying to keep sight without risking a collision or overshoot. They're still chasing, but now they're chasing as individuals, not as a single, coordinated machine. That's Boyington's first proof he has turned 11 Zeros into a series of separate problems. And that matters because a single Zero behind you is dangerous. Multiple Zeros behind you when they're coordinated is lethal. The coordination is the multiplier. So Boyington attacks the multiplier. He uses the low-level layer like a tool. Every time he touches a cloud edge, every time he lets glare wash the canopy line, he's buying himself fractions of a second where a pilot behind him has to reacquire. Fractions of a second sound small until you remember what air combat really is, decisions made at closing speeds where a half-second mistake puts a fighter 100 yards off the line it meant to hold. The small win isn't that they give up. Not yet. The small win is that the pursuit stops tightening. The noose doesn't close the way it should. Instead of Boyington feeling the Zeros getting closer and closer with every correction, he starts sensing something different, moments where they hesitate, moments where they don't gain, moments where the threat behind him isn't one clean. Continuous pressure. He's not safe, but he has changed the shape of the danger, and he can feel the psychology shift, because when a pursuer expects a target to fly correctly, they're comfortable. They know what will happen next. They know where to put the nose. But when a target starts flying wrong, when the target behaves like it doesn't care about the rules, comfort disappears. Every attacker now has to decide, do I follow him down into the worst layer and risk losing control, losing sight, or losing my own safety margin? Or do I stay smart, stay higher, and accept that I might not get the clean shot I expected. That moment, the first hesitation, is the first proof that Boyington's farmer move has leverage. Because hesitation in a pursuit is expensive. It creates gaps, it breaks timing, it forces split-second choices that turn coordinated hunting into a messy scramble. And now Boyington has something he didn't have 30 seconds earlier. He has breathing room, not enough to relax, not enough to climb, but enough to push the tactic harder, to keep forcing them into the one place they don't want to be, a low-level chase, where every second is a new sight picture, and every new sight picture is a chance to lose him. That's when the pursuit enters its next phase, when the enemy stops treating this like a simple execution and starts treating it like a problem. The first seconds bought Boyington space. The next minutes tried to collect payment. Down low, everything that makes a fighter pilot safe gets stripped away. There's no graceful exit. There's no clean dive to build speed because you're already near the deck. And there's no guarantee the enemy will stay cautious just because the geometry is ugly. The zeros don't disappear. They adjust. At first, they chase like a pack, everyone following the same target, everyone trying to be the one who gets the angle. That's the easiest way to lose a man in haze and glare, because it clumps your eyes into one place. Boyington's low-level weaving punishes that, so the pursuit starts to change shape. Instead of one tight string, it becomes layers, a few aircraft staying slightly higher to keep visual reference, a few dropping lower to stay aggressive, and others sliding out to the sides to catch him if he jinks too far. That's the escalation. The enemy stops trying to win with one clean solution and starts trying to build a trap. Boyington can feel it in the pressure. The chase isn't a single line behind him anymore. It's angles. It's the sense that if he makes one big, obvious turn, somebody won't be behind him, they'll be waiting where he's going. And low altitude makes that worse, not better, because the horizon lies. You don't see the whole sky, you see slices of it. A zero can vanish behind haze and reappear at a different angle like it teleported, when really it just used your limited sightline against you. Now add Rabaul's environment, the kind of airspace where the ground isn't neutral. Every approach is covered by anti-aircraft fire. Every mile closer is more risk, not less. Staying low can hide you, but it can also pin you inside the very danger zone everyone's trained to avoid. So Boyington is doing two things at once, and both of them are expensive. First, he's trying to stay unpredictable enough that the zeros can't settle their guns. Second, he's trying to keep his own aircraft inside a narrow band low enough to break the pursuit picture, but not so low that one mistake, one gust, one misread of the layer, one moment of fixation turns the ocean or terrain into the final enemy. This is where farm flying stops sounding like an insult and starts sounding like a skill. Civilian low-altitude flying isn't about bravery. It's about judgment. It's about reading small changes in the world light. Wind. Distance before they turn into disasters. It's about making decisions early. Because down low you don't get to make them late. Boyington uses that mindset. He doesn't wait for the zeros to be perfect. He moves before they are. He never gives them the same line for long. He changes altitude in short. Sharp slices, not dramatic climbs that scream, "Here I go," but small moves that shift his silhouette against the haze. He changes heading just enough to force pursuers to correct, because every correction costs them something: spacing, timing, and the clean lead angle they need to hit a fast target. The zeros try to solve it with aggression. A couple commit lower, trying to close the distance and end it quick. That's where Boyington's gamble gets dangerous, because a low-level pursuer doesn't need much time on the sight. A short burst from close range is all it takes. So Boyington does what the rulebook hates. He uses ugliness as cover. He drags the chase through the worst visual conditions he can find, near the edges of cloud layers, through patches of glare, across zones where the ocean and sky merge into a single washed-out strip. The Corsair is a dark shape that can vanish for half a second if it's placed right. Half a second is everything. It's the difference between steady target and where did he go. That's the moment the pursuit starts to bleed coordination. A coordinated chase relies on shared information. He's low, he's left, he's accelerating, he's climbing. If your eyes are constantly reacquiring, the calls become late, then wrong, then useless. One pilot sees him and commits. Another loses him and guesses. A third is sure he has the right target, but he's chasing a shadow of a shadow. The pack starts to break into sub-packs, each convinced they're the one that still has him. From Boyington's cockpit. It feels like pressure waves. He'll sense a zero tightening. Then it fades. Another appears higher, then slides away. He's still in danger, maybe more danger than before, but it's no longer a single mechanical squeeze. It's uneven. It's fractured. And fractured is survivable. But the enemy isn't done. The next escalation is smarter instead of chasing the Corsair's tail. They try to anticipate where it must go. At low level. Your options are constrained. You can't just climb to reset the fight. You can't just extend forever if fuel or distance to friendly cover becomes a factor. You have to keep moving through a limited space. So the Zeros begin to spread wider, trying to build a net. This is where Boyington's experience as a commander matters. He isn't thinking about one attacker. He's thinking about the shape of the whole problem. He's watching for the telltale signs of a bracket, one aircraft peeling wide to the left, another mirroring to the right, somebody staying higher to dive down when he commits. It's a brutal moment because it demands two impossible things at once: fly perfectly down low and think 3 moves ahead while people are trying to kill you. The Corsair helps him, but only if he uses it correctly. The airplane's strength isn't turn tighter, it's keep speed, keep authority, and punish anyone who gets sloppy. That means Boyington can't get slow. He can't bleed energy just to make the chase look dramatic. If he gets slow, the Zero's advantage shows up instantly. So he manages speed like a budget. He spends it only when it buys him a reset. He uses small dives to pick up airspeed, small turns to shift the sight picture, then straightens just long enough to stretch the formation again. It's not one trick. It's a cycle break, the picture. Stretch the spacing. Deny the shot. Repeat. Now the pursuit enters its most dangerous phase the moment an enemy realizes the target isn't going to panic turn and give them the easy kill. That realization can trigger the one thing Boyington has been trying to prevent: discipline. If even a handful of those Zeros settle down, keep their spacing, and take turns making controlled attack passes, the odds swing back toward fatal. That's how you kill a maneuvering target. Don't chase the tail. Cut across. Force the target to react. Then let another aircraft take the next window. Boyington senses the shift. The attacks become less frantic, more deliberate. And that's when the low-level environment turns from cover into constraint again, because deliberate attacks can come from above, and above is where he can't see as well while skimming the layer. So he does the only thing that still gives him an edge. He makes the environment itself part of the fight. He times his moves around visibility using cloud edges to break sight at the exact moment an attacker wants to commit. Using glare to erase the Corsair's outline during a critical second. Using low-level speed changes to force overshoots. The Zeros can't afford overshoots down here. Overshoot too hard, and you don't just lose the firing angle, you risk losing the target entirely. In a crowded, messy layer, losing the target for 2 seconds can mean losing him for good. And now, one by one. The chase starts to fail in small ways that add up. A Zero breaks off to climb back up and re-establish visual. Another follows, trying to keep from getting trapped low. A third stays committed, but ends up alone, without the tight support that makes aggression safe. Others are still out wide, still trying to anticipate, but their net depends on timing, and timing depends on certainty. And certainty is exactly what Boyington is destroying. This is the tension line of the escalation. Boyington isn't winning the way air combat stories usually win. He's not stacking kills. He's forcing a better-equipped pursuit to gradually become a mess until the only question left is whether the mess breaks in his favor before someone finally gets that one clean second. Because one clean second is all they need. And that's what drags us into the climax, the point where the pursuit either snaps where the Zeros lose him entirely or tightens one last time and proves the rulebook right. By the time the chase reaches its breaking point, Boyington isn't thinking about glory. He's thinking in seconds and angles what he can see, what he can't, and what the Zeros think they see. Because the fight has shifted. It's no longer 11 Zeros on my tail. It's a moving problem set a few aircraft still committed low, others hovering higher to dive, others out wide trying to build a net. That's the dangerous part. When the enemy stops acting like a pack and starts acting like a system, your room disappears. But Boyington has one advantage he built on purpose down here. The system can't stay synchronized. At low altitude, the environment is constantly rewriting the picture. Every small change in heading changes what the pursuers see against the ocean and haze. Every tiny altitude change changes how long they can hold a lead angle without overshooting. Every cloud edge becomes a knife that cuts the chase into fragments. One pilot sees him. Another doesn't. Another sees a flash and commits too early. The Zeros want one clean second. Boyington's entire plan is to make sure that second never stays clean long enough to turn into hits. He keeps the Corsair moving like a target that refuses to cooperate. Not one dramatic move, no Hollywood barrel roll. Just discipline in small decisions. Cut a little, drop a little, straighten a little, then cut again. He's forcing each Zero to fly his fight react late, and you overshoot. React early, and you lose the line. Hesitate, and you lose the target. And then the chase tightens one last time. A Zero comes down from above with commitment fast enough to scare even a pilot who's been calm this whole time. Boyington feels the pressure spike. That instinctive sense that the next 2 seconds decide everything. The attacker isn't trying to sit behind him now. He's trying to cross his path and take the shot as Boyington turns classic pursuit logic, executed from a higher position where the attacker can see more. This is where doctrine would usually say, climb, reset, take the vertical fight. But Boyington can't. Not without offering the Zeros exactly what they want, a predictable, readable climb line. He stays low and makes the attacker pay for committing. He shifts the picture hard enough to spoil the lead. But not so hard he bleeds away the one resource keeping him alive: speed. The Corsair isn't a magic airplane down here, it's a tool. And if he mishandles it, he becomes a slow target at low altitude with enemy fighters above him. So he uses timing instead of brute force. He drags the attacker across a spot where the view is worst, where glare and haze flatten depth, where the horizon line makes distance hard to judge. The diving Zero has to decide: keep pressing and risk overshooting into nothing, or pull up and keep visual. That decision happens in fractions of a second. Under pressure, pilots make human choices, not perfect ones. The Zero pulls just enough to stay safe. That's not a victory, but it's a crack, because a failed. Committed attack costs energy. It costs position. It costs confidence. And it forces the next attacker to choose between repeating the mistake or changing the plan. Now the Zeros start doing what disciplined pilots do when a pursuit turns messy. They begin rotating. One peels off to climb. Another takes his place. Another comes down from a different angle. They're trying to turn this into a sequence of controlled attack windows. Boyington answers the same way every time, by breaking the window before it becomes a shot. He forces overshoots. He forces late corrections. He forces 2 Zeros to come too close to each other to stay aggressive without risking collision. That last part matters more than people realize. Fighters in a chase don't just fear the enemy. They fear hitting each other. A pack that gets too tight at low altitude becomes dangerous to itself. The pursuit starts to degrade into hesitation again. And hesitation, at these speeds, creates spacing. Spacing creates uncertainty. And uncertainty is where Boyington can make the chase collapse. He begins aiming for a specific outcome, not escape by speed, but escape by invisibility, not literal invisibility, but the operational kind. The kind where the enemy loses a positive track long enough that coordination breaks. The kind where each pilot is no longer sure that the aircraft he sees is the same aircraft the others are calling. This is the moment the farmer insult becomes the point. A fighter pilot trained in clean, high-altitude geometry expects the target to behave like a fighter. When the target starts flying like someone used to skimming low, changing altitude and direction in short. Practical adjustments, it doesn't just make the shot harder, it makes prediction harder. And prediction is everything in a pursuit. Boyington doesn't need to be faster than all of them. He needs to be harder to hold than any of them expect. The decisive sequence comes when he finds the best cover he's had so far a low, broken layer where the sky stops being a wide-open board and becomes a cluttered room. The Zeros can still chase, but they can't chase as 11. Not down here. Not through a layer that steals sightlines and forces each aircraft to fly its own safety margin. Boyington threads the Corsair along the edge of that layer and forces a choice. If the Zeros stay high, they keep safety but lose the tight, reliable visual they need for accurate attack timing. If they come low, they keep visual for a moment but risk overshooting, losing spacing, losing each other, and losing him altogether. Some commit low, some hesitate. That split is the break point, because once the enemy is split across altitude bands and angles, coordination becomes a rumor, calls become late. The language of the chase he's there turns into guesses, and in haze and glare, guesses get men killed, so pilots stop guessing. They back off. It happens like a chain reaction. One Zero loses sight for a second and climbs to reacquire. Another follows, not wanting to be alone down low. Another breaks wide and tries to reposition. The few that stay committed suddenly don't have the same support behind them. Their aggression becomes risky instead of confident. Now Boyington pushes the last part of the gamble. He changes his profile at exactly the moment the enemy's attention is fractured. He makes a final series of small, ugly shifts enough to move his aircraft's silhouette against the background so that what was definitely the Corsair becomes a dark shape near the edge of the layer. Then, when the enemy is adjusting when their eyes are doing the work of reacquiring, he slips into the one place the chase can't hold him. The blind zone created by their own spacing and the broken visibility. And suddenly, the pursuit isn't a pursuit. It's 11 pilots searching. Each of them has a piece of the last known picture, but none of them has the whole thing. They're not attacking anymore. They're scanning. They're trying to re-establish certainty. And certainty is gone. This is the conservative, believable version of the impossible outcome, not that 11 Zeros became incompetent, but that the chase reached a point where the cost of staying low and aggressive exceeded the benefit. Without a solid track, pilots can't press, not safely, not as a group, not over hostile airspace where a mistake can be fatal even without enemy fire. The end comes without fireworks, no single dramatic turn, no last-second burst, just the quiet, humiliating moment for the pursuers when the target they were sure they owned is no longer there. Boyington has done the one thing an outnumbered pilot must do to survive. He has changed the fight from, can they kill me, to can they even find me long enough to try? And for this engagement. Over Rabaul, the answer is no. 11 Zeros lose visual contact and coordination. The chase breaks apart. The moment they should have finished him becomes the moment they can't even agree where he went. Boyington doesn't celebrate. He doesn't have time. The victory is simply this: he is still flying. And the enemy that was supposed to erase him is no longer in position to do it. That's the decisive fight. Not a kill count, a collapse of pursuit. A tactical embarrassment inflicted by a move that looked like amateur hour to the people who believed doctrine was the only language a fighter should speak. When the pressure finally drops, it doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like your body realizing it's still alive. Boyington's Corsair is still flying, the engine is still pulling, and the space behind him seconds ago crowded with enemy aircraft has gone strangely quiet. Not because the sky is safe, but because the pursuit has broken. The Zeros that should have finished him aren't stacked in a firing position anymore. They're scattered into late searches and half-committed reattacks that never tighten back into one coordinated squeeze. In practical terms, that's all the aftermath Boyington needs, he made it out. Back among Marines, the story doesn't land as a heroic tally. It lands as a problem. A pilot escaping a chase is believable. A pilot escaping a chase with 11 Zeros committed is the kind of claim that forces men to ask, okay, what exactly happened out there? And Boyington's version is conservative by design. He doesn't sell a miracle. He doesn't talk about shooting down a swarm. He points to the uncomfortable fact the enemy had numbers, position, and initiative, and still lost him. That's when the insult starts changing shape. Farmer in a Corsair was supposed to mean sloppy, amateur, untrained. But the way Boyington survived wasn't random. It was a method that exploited a fragile truth about air combat. A pursuit is only lethal as long as it stays coordinated. Boyington's low-level work short changes in altitude, direction, and speed, timed around glare and broken visibility, didn't make the Zeros weak. It made their shared picture unstable. Once that picture breaks, numbers stop multiplying. They start interfering. Pilots hesitate. Spacing stretches. Calls come late. A pack turns into individuals, and individuals have a harder time finishing a moving target. The immediate doctrinal impact isn't a new rule printed overnight. It's subtler and more realistic. Experienced pilots file it away as a survival option. Altitude still matters. Energy tactics still matter. But Boyington's escape underlines a hard lesson. Doctrine often hates to admit, sometimes the correct move is exactly what the enemy is trained to expect. In the wrong moment. Flying by the book can make you easy to read. And when you're outnumbered, being easy to read is the fastest way to die. Boyington's legacy was never the perfect Marine aviator. It was something messier and more useful. He led VMF 214 in the kind of air war that didn't reward clean theory. Rabaul was a place where conditions were rarely ideal, where formations broke, where sightlines vanished, where a pilot could be doing everything right and still end up with enemies on his tail. In that environment, what mattered most wasn't how well you recited doctrine. It was whether you could stay calm long enough to make one good decision when the book stopped matching the sky. That's the real weight of the farmer in a Corsair moment. It wasn't a stunt. It was a reminder that experience can come from places the military system doesn't always respect. Low-level flying wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't safe. But it taught a kind of judgment that matters in emergencies, reading the world fast, managing risk in small increments, and using the environment to steal the enemy's certainty. And the outcome, 11 Zeros losing him over Rabaul, lands as a different kind of victory. It's not about destruction. It's about refusing to give the enemy the fight they trained for. Boyington didn't beat them by being stronger. He beat them by being harder to predict, harder to track, and harder to coordinate against. In combat terms, he attacked the enemy's real weapon coordination and forced it to fail. That leaves 3 lessons that travel well beyond this one chase. First, doctrine prepares you for the fight you want. Survival often depends on what doctrine doesn't cover ugly. unplanned situations where certainty disappears. Second, being underestimated can be an advantage if you're willing to act in ways the enemy thinks serious people won't do. Third, the simplest crazy idea is usually the one that changes the geometry. Not a miracle, not a superpower, just a choice that makes the enemy's clean solution impossible. And before you go, thank you for spending your time with us. These stories don't stay alive on their own. They survive because people like you choose to listen. Remember, and pass them on. You're not just watching a video, you're helping preserve the real history. The human moments that don't fit neatly into a textbook. So if anything in this episode surprised you, Boyington's nerve, his judgment, or how one wrong-looking move unraveled an entire pursuit, drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them, and they help decide which forgotten story we tell next. Thanks for watching, and thanks for helping keep Major Gregory Pappy Boyington from fading into a footnote.